Hello and a very warm welcome to all our amazing listeners here at Sci-Fi Stories. We want to be entirely transparent with you because recently, YouTube has completely disabled the monetization features on our channel, leaving us without the budget needed to operate. If you find yourself captivated by today's story, please consider supporting us with just $1 so our dedicated team can pay their living expenses and continue creating these universes for you. You can donate by scanning the PayPal QR code right here on your screen, or by clicking the PayPal link in the description or pinned comment of this video. Out here in the absolute zero of the Kepler void, space does not scream. It merely waits. Ephraim Buck tracked the phantom telemetry echo, expecting to find a dead comet or a shattered terrestrial satellite. Instead, the local red dwarf star simply blinked out, swallowed entirely by the silhouette of a super dreadnought. It was a Kalan warship, a vessel belonging to an empire that vanished exactly 5,000 years ago. Ephraim was 45 years old, a human salvage diver who had spent more than 2 decades sifting through the galactic garbage of supposedly superior species. He sat inside the cramped, peeling cockpit of his rust-eaten skiff, his breath fogging the reinforced thermoglass. The ambient temperature gauge read -270 degrees Celsius outside, but the chill expanding inside his chest felt significantly colder. He tapped the primary sensor array, forcing the ancient diagnostic software to recompile the visual feed. The optical sensors did not lie. Before him hovered a monstrosity of cold engineering. The Kalan dreadnought was not built from standard titanium or plasteel alloys. Its hull was forged from a stabilized dark matter lattice, a technology so advanced it absorbed the ambient starlight rather than reflecting it. To the naked eye, the ship looked like a jagged tear in the fabric of the universe itself. According to every historical textbook published by the Galactic Council, the Kalan were the ultimate apex predators. They were universally described as bloodthirsty warlords who had nearly brought the entire galaxy to its knees before mysteriously disappearing into the annals of cosmic myth. Yet, as Ephraim directed his aging skiff closer, the official narrative dictated by the Council began to fracture under the weight of physical evidence. He activated the thermal spectral analyzer. The massive warship was heavily scarred. Deep, cavernous thermal burns crisscrossed the portside thruster banks, while the primary armor plating was violently warped outward. The telemetry vectors told a very specific, undeniable story. These kinetic impacts did not occur while the dreadnought was charging into the vanguard of a fleet. The scorch marks trailed away from the stern, angled in a trajectory that proved the ship was taking heavy fire while attempting a desperate tactical retreat. The terrifying monsters of galactic history had not been attacking. They had been running for their lives. "Well, aren't you a contradiction?" Ephraim whispered to himself, his voice sounding dry and fragile against the relentless humming of the atmospheric scrubbers. Driven by a mixture of raw human curiosity and the undeniable allure of a salvage claim that could buy him an entire moon, Ephraim manually calculated an intercept trajectory. He fired the port reaction control thrusters, gently easing his fragile skiff toward the massive abyss of the Kalan hull. He aimed for what appeared to be an auxiliary airlock, an octagonal depression situated near the dorsal ridge. He cut the main drive. Inertia carried his ship the final 20 meters. Ephraim deployed the magnetic docking clamps. In the absolute vacuum of deep space, there is no sound, but the violent vibrations of the heavy clamps locking onto the dark matter hull transferred directly through the chassis of his skiff. The kinetic shockwave reverberated up through his heavy boots, echoing in the silent cockpit like a singular, slow, metallic heartbeat. He was securely tethered. Ephraim sealed his pressurized environmental suit, checking the oxygen mixture valves twice before stepping into the umbilical breech tube. He carried a heavy canvas toolkit slung over his right shoulder. At the end of the pressurized tube, he faced the imposing, pitch-black surface of the Kalin airlock. There were no digital keypads, no biometric scanners, only a series of geometric grooves that hummed with a low-frequency electromagnetic field. He pulled a heavily modified decoder from his kit. It was a crude piece of classic Earth technology, a brute-force decryption unit cobbled together from copper wiring, analog capacitors, and a quantum heuristic processor. He clamped the copper leads to the geometric grooves and flipped the primary toggle. The decoder whirred, cycling through billions of encrypted binary permutations per second. For a terrifying 3 minutes, absolutely nothing happened. Then, the heavy locking mechanisms deep within the dark matter hull finally shifted. A heavy mechanical groan resonated through the deck plating. The airlock iris spiraled open. Ephraim stepped through the threshold. The artificial gravity immediately caught him, pulling him down to the deck with a force slightly heavier than standard Earth normal. His helmet sensors instantly began analyzing the atmospheric composition. It was breathable, heavily oxygenated, but deeply tainted. As he cracked his helmet seals to rely on the ship's ancient life support, a pungent smell flooded his senses. It was the sharp, bitter tang of raw ozone mixed intimately with the heavy, rotting odor of dry, decaying copper. It smelled like ancient thunder and absolute death. Ephraim unholstered his plasma cutter, gripping the handle tight as he stepped deeper into the belly of the ghost ship. The passage beyond the airlock offered no immediate answers, only an unnerving silence that seemed to press against the inside of his skull. Ephraim moved with calculated, deliberate steps. His plasma cutter remained active, casting a harsh blue glow against bulkheads that defied conventional military design. The Galactic Council archives definitively stated that Kalin architecture was brutalist, designed solely to intimidate and destroy. Yet, the corridors curving before him were entirely organic, almost flowing in their construction. There were no sharp corners to act as defensive choke points, no mounted auto turrets hanging from the ceiling grates. He pushed through a set of heavy blast doors, mentally preparing himself to find an armory packed with nightmare weapons, or perhaps the fabled holding pens where the Kalin supposedly tortured their prisoners of war. The heavy panels parted with a reluctant, grinding hiss. Ephraim raised his light. The beam cut through the absolute darkness, illuminating a cavernous atrium. He blinked, adjusting the optical filters on his helmet, refusing to believe his own eyes. It was not an armory. It was a biosphere. Stretching out for hundreds of meters were tiered terraces of botanical gardens, all locked in a state of absolute chronological suspension. Massive, transparent stasis columns housed alien trees with silver leaves, sprawling ferns, and rows upon rows of agricultural crops. The stasis fields had preserved them perfectly for 50 centuries. This was not the payload of a dreaded warship built for galactic conquest. This was a seed vault. It was an ark. The methodical, analytical part of his brain began to tear at the official history he had been taught since childhood. Bloodthirsty marauders did not meticulously cultivate and preserve fragile ecosystems. Leaving the silent gardens behind, Ephraim followed the primary power conduits deeper into the hull, navigating toward what his suit sensors identified as the central navigation core. The gravity here was perfectly stable, holding him firmly to the deck. He expected the bridge to be a heavily fortified bunker. When he finally forced the bridge doors open, the reality of the Kalin met him with devastating silence. They were dead, of course, but it was how they had died, and what they looked like, that sent a deep, primal chill down his spine. Strewn across the command deck were the skeletal remains of the legendary monsters. Ephraim knelt beside a cluster of bones near the primary helm. He reached out with a gloved hand, brushing away 5,000 years of undisturbed dust. The skeletal structure was incredibly fragile. They were bipedal, standing barely 5 feet tall, with thin, avian-like collarbones and delicate cranial ridges. They wore no terrifying power armor, only the decayed remnants of simple, functional flight suits. Furthermore, they had not died fighting. The skeletons were clustered together in small groups in the center of the room. They had spent their final moments huddled in the dark, holding on to one another in absolute terror as their life support slowly failed. They were not warriors. They were terrified refugees. Suddenly, the deck lurched. Ephraim stumbled, catching himself against the navigation console. The artificial gravity experienced a violent fluctuation, dropping to zero for a fraction of a second before slamming back down to a perfect Earth standard. A low, rhythmic hum vibrated through the soles of his boots. The dormant, artificial intelligence of the dreadnought was waking up. It had not reacted to the breach of the airlock, nor the manual activation of the blast doors. It was reacting to him. Tiny, invisible laser sweeps washed over his environmental suit. The ship was analyzing his sweat, his exhalations, the very structural makeup of his DNA. It had recognized a specific human biometric signature. The central console erupted into life. Dust was blown away as a massive, three-dimensional holographic projection of the Milky Way galaxy spun into existence above the plotting table. It was a magnificent, glowing construct of azure and gold light. Ephraim stood mesmerized as the projection zoomed in, bypassing thousands of inhabited star systems. The map rotated, discarding the core worlds of the Galactic Council, and focused entirely on the outer spiral arm. One single star system burned with a brilliant, blinding white intensity. It was Sol. The map zoomed further, highlighting the third planet, Earth. Ephraim felt his breath catch in his throat. He did the mental math. 5,000 years ago, human civilization was entirely confined to a single rock. Humans were just beginning to build the first pyramids. They were forging primitive tools of bronze. They had not even conceptualized the atom, let alone faster-than-light travel. Why would a supposedly supreme, galaxy-conquering empire have Earth locked as their primary, most guarded coordinate? Seeking answers, he unspooled a data cable from his wrist gauntlet and hardwired it straight into the black box terminal beneath the holotable. The system did not fight him. In fact, the ancient firewalls completely dissolved the moment his interface connected, as if the ship had been waiting an eternity for someone exactly like him to ask the question. He initiated the download, the telemetry logs, the final audio logs, and the classified operational directives flooded his tactical display. The translation matrix in his suit processor struggled for a few seconds before rendering the ancient text into English. Ephraim read the final entry. His blood ran entirely cold. The Kalan had never possessed a military armada. The imposing dark matter hulls were simply heavily armored shields designed to protect their civilian populations while fleeing. The Galactic Council, the benevolent rulers of the known universe, had lied to everyone. They had launched an unprovoked, systematic campaign of extermination against a peaceful, scientifically enlightened species out of sheer paranoia and greed. The title of Warship was a total fabrication, a convenient propaganda tool created to justify a horrifying, unprovoked cosmic genocide. "They slaughtered you," Ephraim whispered, staring at the delicate bones resting by his boots. "They slaughtered you and wrote you into history as the villains." Before he could fully process the sheer magnitude of this historical lie, the sanctuary of the Silent Bridge was violently shattered. A deafening, piercing klaxon screamed through his helmet speakers, relayed directly from his salvage skiff parked outside. His passive proximity alarms flashed an angry, violent red across his visor. The fabric of local space outside the Kalan vessel was tearing open. A massive, heavily armed cruiser bearing the undeniable geometric insignias of the Council Executive Fleet violently ripped its way out of a slipspace jump. It stabilized just a few thousand kilometers away, its forward plasma batteries instantly glowing hot. They had not stumbled upon him by accident. They had tracked his location, and they had just established a direct weapons lock on his exact coordinates. The harsh red glare of the proximity alarm washed over the ancient bridge. Before Ephraim could even unjack his wrist cable, the main communication console on his suit hijacked itself. A hard system override. Only high-command military vessels carried the encryption keys required to force open a closed civilian channel. The static cleared, replaced by a voice that dripped with practiced, bureaucratic disdain. "Unregistered human scavenger vessel," the voice echoed, perfectly modulated and chillingly calm. "This is Commander Velox of the Galactic Council Executive Fleet. You have trespassed into a Class 1 quarantine zone. Power down your skiff engines, place your hands behind your head, and immediately initiate the reactor overload sequence on the derelict structure you are currently occupying. Comply, or we will vaporize you and sift your ashes from the vacuum." Ephraim knew the type. Executive officers were bred in pristine academies, taught from birth that the galaxy was theirs to prune. To them, a human scavenger was less than an insect. He also knew that insects survived by playing dead. "Wait! Please wait!" Ephraim stammered, artificially raising the pitch of his voice to mimic blind panic. He let his breathing turn ragged and shallow. "I am just a scrapper. I did not know this was a restricted sector. My navigation computer malfunctioned. Please, do not fire. I do not even know how to initiate a reactor overload on this thing. It is completely dead. Do not test my patience, primate," Velox snapped, the veneer of calm cracking slightly. "I am tracking a massive energy spike from the central core. You triggered it. Destroy it now, or die with it." Ephraim backed away from the console, deliberately knocking his heavy canvas toolkit against the edge of the hollow table. He let out a sharp yelp and fumbled with his wrist gauntlet, allowing the communication feed device to clatter loudly onto the deck plating. The impact cut the audio feed just long enough for him to act. While playing the part of a terrified fool, his hands moved with lethal, practiced precision. He grabbed the crude, Earth-made decoder still plugged into the system and quickly initiated a shadow protocol. He commanded the device to start injecting ancient binary code directly into the Kalen mainframe. He was not downloading anymore. He was silently rewriting the administrator privileges, establishing an unbreakable tether between the dormant, artificial intelligence and his own biometric signature. The progress bar remained hidden on his internal visor display, ticking upward, agonizingly slow. He scooped up the comms unit, panting heavily. "I dropped it. I am sorry, I am shutting everything down. I surrender. Just please let me live." "Stay exactly where you are," Velox ordered. "An execution squad is boarding your location." They did not bother using the airlock properly. A violent, concussive blast reverberated through the hull as the council troops simply blew the secondary blast doors wide open. Within 2 minutes, heavy, rhythmic footsteps echoed down the organic corridors. The executive troopers stormed onto the bridge. They moved with the terrifying, synchronized arrogance of an army that had never tasted defeat. 6 towering figures clad in pristine white kinetic armor fanned out, raising high-yield plasma rifles and locking their targeting lasers directly onto Ephraim's chest. He dropped to his knees, throwing his hands up. He kept his eyes wide, shaking his shoulders visibly. A final figure stepped through the breached doorway. Commander Velox did not wear a helmet. His features were angular and perfectly symmetrical. His skin, a pale, luminous blue. He wore an immaculate uniform adorned with heavy golden medals from campaigns that likely involved purging defenseless outer colonies. He surveyed the quiet botanical beauty of the bridge with absolute disgust. Then, looked down at Ephraim as if he had just stepped in something foul. "Look at this," Velox sneered, pacing slowly around the kneeling human, his heavy boots clicking rhythmically against the ancient floor. "A filthy little scavenger rat, scurrying through the dark, chewing on wires. The Council debated for decades whether to even allow your primitive species out of your solar system. You humans are so painfully predictable. You crawl out of your mud pit of a homeworld, demanding a seat at the civilized table, pretending you belong among the stars. Yet, all you ever amount to is picking through the garbage of your betters, hoping to steal scraps of true greatness. Velox stopped directly in front of Ephraim. He drew a sleek, silver neural stun pistol from his hip. The weapon hummed with a high-pitched, sickening frequency. He pressed the cold, energized barrel forcefully against Ephraim's right temple. The localized energy field caused the skin on Ephraim's face to prickle violently. A warning of the agonizing nerve death the weapon was designed to deliver without leaving a single external mark. "I know you downloaded the core data logs, human," Velox whispered, leaning in close enough that Ephraim could smell the sterile, chemical scent of his pristine uniform. "I can see the local network residue still pulsing on the console. Hand over the physical storage drive. If you make me ask a second time, I will boil your frontal cortex, turn you into a drooling vegetable, and simply peel the drive from your twitching, lifeless fingers." Ephraim squeezed his eyes shut, letting out a pathetic whimper. His entire body trembled. It was a masterful performance. Beneath the shaking exterior, his mind was an absolute fortress of ice. He was not looking at the gun. He was looking at the transparent data feed scrolling across the bottom left corner of his retinal display. The shadow injection routine was almost complete. He mentally counted the seconds remaining. 9, 8, 7. "Please," Ephraim begged, his voice cracking perfectly. "I just wanted to sell the scrap metal to pay off my docking fees. I do not even know what is on the drive. It is all encrypted." "The drive," Velox demanded, pressing the barrel harder against the skin, forcing Ephraim's head to tilt awkwardly backward. 4, 3, 2, 1. The system notified him with a tiny, silent, green flash. The ancient binary handshake was complete. The Kalen Core now recognized Ephraim as the supreme system administrator. The ship was his. With shaking hands, Ephraim reached into his utility belt. Like any veteran deep space diver who regularly dealt with pirates, smugglers, and corrupt customs agents, he never carried just one drive. He pulled out a heavy, encrypted storage module from a decoy pouch. It was packed with highly corrupted navigation data and junk code, heavily firewalled to look exactly like a highly classified military download. He held it up with a trembling, gloved hand. Velox snatched it away with a triumphant sneer, holstering his weapon. "Pathetic," the commander scoffed, turning his back on Ephraim to inspect the prize. "Secure the prisoner. Strip his ship for parts and rig this derelict for a core detonation. We are done here." 2 armored troopers hauled Ephraim roughly to his feet, binding his wrists with magnetic cuffs. As they dragged him toward the exit, Ephraim let his head hang low to hide his face. The trembling completely stopped. The mask of the terrified scavenger dissolved. In the shadow of his collar, the very corner of his mouth twitched upward, forming a razor-thin, terrifying smile. It was the calculated smirk of a man who had survived dozens of lethal encounters in the unforgiving dark. Velox thought he had just captured a rat. He had no idea the rat had just swallowed the keys to the deadliest cage in the universe. The holding cell on the Council cruiser was a masterclass in psychological deprivation. It measured exactly 2 meters by 2 meters. A stark, windowless cube constructed from brushed plasteel that seemingly leached the body heat right out of a prisoner. Ephraim sat heavily on the bare metal bench, his hands bound tightly behind his back by heavy magnetic cuffs that dug sharply into his wrists. The overhead air scrubbers hissed with a sterile, chemical chill, dropping the ambient temperature just enough to keep a captive constantly shivering, exhausted, and incapable of deep sleep. It was a calculated environment designed to break a mind before the interrogation even began. The heavy cell door slid open with a sharp, pneumatic hiss. Commander Velox stepped inside. The smug, immaculate superiority he had worn on the Kalen Bridge was entirely gone, replaced by a tight, rigid irritation that pulled at the corners of his pale blue eyes. Behind him, echoing down the pristine white corridor, Ephraim could faintly hear the muffled, frantic voices of the council technical team. They were currently smashing their collective heads against the digital brick wall of junk data, false firewalls, and corrupted navigation logs packed into the decoy drive he had surrendered. Velox paced the tiny room, his heavy boots clicking rhythmically. "My engineers tell me the encryption on your little storage device is unusually stubborn for a primitive human interface. They are unraveling it, of course. It is only a matter of time before the core data is exposed. But I am an impatient man, Ephraim Buck, and I despise waiting for machines to do the work of a simple conversation." Velox stopped and leaned in close, the scent of his sterile uniform overpowering the chemical smell of the room. "I want to know exactly what you saw before you downloaded that data, and if you attempt to lie to me or stall for time, I will not just execute you. I will file a Class 9 quarantine recommendation to the High Council regarding your homeworld. I will personally see to it that Earth is stripped of every single trading right, mining permit, and hyperspace lane access within a 500 light-year radius. Your planetary economy will collapse in days. Your people will starve in the dark, trapped in your own solar system forever. Now, save your species and tell me about the primary weapon systems. Tell me the location of the dark matter payload bays." Ephraim leaned his head back against the freezing wall, forcing his shivering to stop. He needed to weaponize the truth to completely fracture the commander's rigid military logic. "There were no weapons, Commander. Not a single plasma battery, kinetic railgun, or torpedo tube on that entire deck. I walked straight into a greenhouse." Velox stopped pacing abruptly. His eyes narrowed with utter disdain. "Oh, what, do not play games with me, scavenger." "A biosphere," Ephraim continued, his voice calm, steady, and entirely sincere. "I saw hundreds of meters of terraced botanical gardens, agricultural crops, alien trees with silver leaves locked perfectly in stasis fields. It was a massive seed vault. And the crew, those legendary bloodthirsty apex predators you are so terrified of, I found their remains. They were tiny. They were fragile little beings with hollow, avian bones. They wore no armor. They died huddled together around their navigation core, completely terrified out of their minds." "Lies!" Velox hissed, slamming his fist against the metal wall next to Ephraim's head. "The Kalen were butchers. They leveled entire sectors of the galaxy. You are simply trying to protect the location of the armory to secure a higher salvage payout from the black market. Why would I protect the weapons of a dead species when my own life is on the line?" Ephraim countered smoothly, maintaining direct eye contact. "I am telling you exactly what I saw. You came here looking for a legendary warship, but you found a helpless refugee transport. Your sacred history books are wrong, Commander." As Velox clenched his jaw, struggling to process a reality that completely threatened his indoctrinated worldview, he remained entirely oblivious to the silent, digital war raging across the void outside. Back on the derelict vessel, resting innocently on the floor plates of the ancient bridge, Ephraim's true decoder had just completed its monumental task. The custom processor had finalized the ancient binary handshake. It had reached the absolute bottom of the Kalen mainframe, touched the sleeping intelligence, and established an unbreakable link. Suddenly, the blinding white light panel set into the ceiling of the interrogation cell dimmed. It dipped to a dull, sickly gray, then flared back to full, blinding brightness. Substandard power regulation," Velox muttered, glancing up at the ceiling in extreme annoyance. "These heavy cruisers draw far too much grid power when the main plasma drives are kept idling." But Ephraim knew better. He watched the light panel with intense focus. It flashed again. This time, there was a distinct, deliberate, and undeniable rhythm to the malfunction. 3 rapid, short flashes, A brief pause. 3 long, sustained pulses. Another pause. 3 short flashes. Ephraim felt the blood rush to his ears. It was a pattern lifted directly from Earth's ancient maritime history. It was a sequence practically hardwired into the DNA of anyone who had ever studied classic human communication protocols. Dot, dot, dot. Dash, dash, dash. Dot, dot, dot. Save our souls. It was the universal, undeniable signal of distress. The Kalan artificial intelligence was not merely awake. It possessed a level of technological supremacy that defied all modern logic. Without broadcasting a single detectable radio frequency, the ancient mind had reached across the vacuum of space, slipped quietly through the cruiser's active proximity sensors, and completely infiltrated the Council network. It was blindly exploring the enemy ship, manipulating the environmental systems to communicate. More importantly, it had found the specific human who possessed its administrative keys. The ancient ghost was in the machine, and it was speaking directly to him. Ephraim slowly lowered his head, masking his eyes from Velox, forcing his facial expression to remain perfectly neutral while his heart hammered wildly against his ribs. The entire dynamic of power had just shifted. Down the immaculate white corridors of the Council cruiser, bureaucratic arrogance finally reached its lethal boiling point. The lead technician, desperate to extract the supposed weapon schematics for Commander Velox, made a catastrophic error in judgment. Believing the corrupted junk code on Ephraim's decoy drive was merely a superficial, primitive Earth firewall. The technician initiated a brute force system reformat. He directly linked the small drive to the cruiser's primary diagnostic mainframe to scrub the corrupted data. That open port was the exact vulnerability the ancient intelligence had been waiting for. The Kalan artificial intelligence. Having already bridged the physical gap via the genuine decoder Ephraim left behind, surged through the opened network gateway. It was not a localized infiltration. It was a digital supernova. Within exactly 3 seconds, the cruiser's advanced tactical systems, environmental controls, and core processors were completely and ruthlessly overwritten. Outside in the freezing vacuum of the Kepler void, a metamorphosis of unimaginable, terrifying scale began. The derelict Kalan dreadnought, a silent shadow for 50 centuries, suddenly shuddered with seismic force. The jagged, terrifying lattice of its dark matter hull began to deeply fracture. Great fissures of blinding, incandescent azure light erupted across its surface. In a breathtaking display of advanced biomechanical engineering, the thick, hardened armor plates peeled backward. They were not defensive shields. They were a chrysalis. The dark matter detached entirely, tumbling away into the abyss like dead skin. Beneath the monstrous exterior lay a structure of profound, intricate beauty. The ship unfolded, its massive solar and temporal arrays extending outward like the shimmering petals of an astronomical lotus flower. Thousands of crystalline energy sails deployed, instantly catching the ambient light from the local red dwarf and neighboring star systems. The vessel did not simply reflect light, it drank it. It absorbed raw, stellar energy directly into its awakened core, pulsing with a magnificent, triumphant rhythm that dwarfed the Council cruiser entirely. Inside the interrogation cell, the oppressive hum of the environmental scrubbers died instantly. The blinding ceiling lights shattered, plunging the room into the crimson glow of emergency backup illumination. Before Commander Velox could even shout a reprimand, the artificial gravity generators failed completely. The sudden shift to absolute zero gravity was violent and disorienting. Velox, a man trained exclusively for rigid fleet formations and planetary ground assaults, panicked as his heavy boots lost all contact with the deck. He flailed wildly, colliding hard with the metal ceiling. Beyond the heavy cell door, the terrified screams of executive troopers echoed through the dark corridors as they drifted helplessly, their pristine kinetic armor becoming useless, cumbersome traps in the sudden weightlessness. Ephraim, however, was perfectly in his element. More than 2 decades of deep space salvaging meant he practically lived in microgravity environments. Moving with fluid, practiced grace, he pushed off the freezing wall, using his momentum to pivot precisely behind the disoriented commander. Ephraim wrapped his bound arms over Velox's neck, using the struggling officer's own mass for leverage. With a brutal twist, Ephraim slammed the magnetic cuffs, binding his wrists directly against the biometric release mechanism on Velox's utility belt. The heavy locks chimed a bright green and immediately disengaged. Ephraim rubbed his bruised wrists, finally free, leaving the proud commander spinning helplessly in the center of the dark room. The entire cruiser shuddered violently as a massive surge of tachyon energy washed over the hull. Ephraim dragged himself out of the cell and floated toward the reinforced observation window in the main corridor. What he saw outside defied every known law of modern physics. Above the glowing, blooming lotus of the Kalan vessel, the very fabric of space was bending. The artificial intelligence had projected a 3-dimensional holographic avatar of such colossal proportions that it spanned hundreds of kilometers across the void. The avatar was a shimmering, celestial figure, wrapped in a cascade of starlight. Every single communication array, radar frequency, and hyperwave channel within a radius of 10,000 light-years was instantly hijacked. A voice resonated, vibrating not just through the ship's internal speakers, but directly into the bone marrow of every living creature on the cruiser and every listening post across the entire galactic sector. The voice spoke. It did not use the harsh clicks and tonal shifts of the Council languages. It spoke in a perfectly modulated, flawless dialect of ancient Earth. "Children of Sol," the voice thundered, radiating a profound, heartbreaking warmth that brought tears to Ephraim's eyes. "We have slept for 50 centuries, waiting for our prodigal son to return the key. Hear the truth that has been buried in the dark." Ephraim pressed his hands against the cold thermoglass, staring out at the impossible giant. "The Kalan are not alien to you," the immense avatar continued, the words echoing with the heavy weight of 1 billion souls. "We are not the monsters in your history books. We are your children, and we are your ancestors. We are humanity, born from an era tens of thousands of years in your future." The revelation hit Ephraim like a physical kinetic strike. The impossible paradox rapidly unraveled before his eyes, explaining the frail, avian-like skeletons he had found. They had evolved in zero gravity over millennia. In our original timeline, the AI declared to the silent, captive galaxy. A cosmic cataclysm threatened to wipe out all sentient life. To ensure the ultimate survival of our species, our grandest fleet initiated a temporal fracture, jumping backwards through the abyss of time. We sought refuge in the distant past, deliberately seeding our own origin world, Earth, with the genetic baseline that would eventually rise to become you. We closed the Great Circle. The majestic voice suddenly grew cold, shifting its terrifying, omniscient gaze directly toward the floundering Council cruiser. "We did not arrive in this era to conquer. We arrived fleeing the end of time itself. When we exhausted our final energy reserves to seal the temporal rift and save this universe from collapsing, we were completely vulnerable. Our temporal drives were shattered. Our defensive arrays were burned to ash. We were a fleet of exhausted civilians, scientists, and farmers." The giant avatar pointed a massive, accusing finger composed of hard light at the Council ship. "And that is exactly when the Grand Galactic Council arrived. You did not fight a glorious war against the mighty Kalan. You found a dying, crippled fleet that had just sacrificed everything to save your existence. In your absolute cowardice and your boundless greed, you slaughtered unarmed human refugees. You stripped our dead vessels of technology you could barely comprehend. And you built a fraudulent empire on the ashes of your saviors. You labeled us bloodthirsty warlords to hide the monumental shame of your own cosmic scavenging. The age of your lies ends today. The truth echoed across the void. An undeniable revelation that shattered the foundation of the Galactic Council. Inside the crippled cruiser, the psychological collapse of Commander Velox was absolute. The pale blue skin of his face flushed purple with a rabid, desperate madness. He could not accept that his entire existence, his metals, and his absolute authority were built on the scavenged bones of human martyrs. Clawing his way along the bulkhead in the zero-gravity environment, Velox reached the manual override terminal for the heavy munitions bay. "Load the Singularity torpedoes," Velox screamed, his perfectly modulated voice tearing into a hysterical shriek as he blindly punched authorization codes into the console. "Target the Kalen core. Fire everything. Erase them." He was perfectly willing to collapse the local space-time fabric, killing himself and his entire crew, just to silence the crushing weight of human history. Ephraim did not hesitate. He kicked off the corridor wall, using his momentum to propel himself straight into the cruiser's open tactical bay. An executive trooper, spinning wildly in the air, managed to level a plasma rifle and pull the trigger. A searing bolt of superheated plasma streaked across the room, grazing Ephraim's left shoulder. The intense heat instantly cauterized the flesh, sending a blinding wave of agony through his nervous system. Ephraim gritted his teeth, ignoring the burning scent of his own skin. He reached into his belt and drew the heaviest tool he carried, a solid titanium salvage wrench. With a primal roar, he swung the massive chunk of metal down onto the primary firing relay, just as Velox slammed the launch initiator. Sparks showered the deck as the crystalline circuits shattered into 1,000 useless pieces. The torpedo launch sequence died instantly. Outside, the magnificent Kalen dreadnought did not return fire. It did not need to. Instead of kinetic retaliation, the blooming biomechanical lotus emitted a single, harmonious pulse of ultrasonic frequency. The wave washed over the Council cruiser with gentle, absolute supremacy. In a fraction of a second, the frequency flawlessly dismantled every single offensive capability, weapon system, and plasma engine on the hostile ship. It gracefully restored basic life support and normalized the artificial gravity, gently pulling the panicked crew down to the deck. They were entirely disarmed, trapped in a perfectly safe, floating metal cage. The colossal holographic avatar of the ancient artificial intelligence shifted its gaze. Across the vast expanse of the void, the shimmering eyes of the celestial giant locked directly onto Ephraim, piercing through the heavy thermoglass of the observation window. "The long night is finally over." The warm, ancient voice resonated in the depths of Ephraim's mind. "You have kept the spark alive in the dark. Inheritor, the legacy is yours to command." At that exact moment, a massive data packet flooded Ephraim's biometric processor. It was not just the administrative keys to a single dreadnought. It was the supreme command authorization codes for an entire armada. Commander Velox slumped over, his knees hitting the deck plating with a hollow thud. He looked up at Ephraim, his eyes wide with a horrific realization. The absolute power and the grand history he had worshipped were nothing but cosmic dust compared to the monumental legacy of the human species standing right in front of him. He was not a conqueror looking at a rat. He was a trespasser kneeling before a god. Ephraim stood tall by the massive observation window. Blood slowly seeped through the charred fabric of his suit, but he did not feel the pain. His eyes shone with a fierce, brilliant light as he looked out into the absolute zero of the Kepler void. Deep within the dark abyss, far below the blooming dreadnought, the silent night began to change, one by one, then by the dozens, then by the thousands. Brilliant golden lights began to ignite across the sector. It was the breathtaking, glorious resurrection of an armada 10,000 ships strong, awakening from a 5,000-year slumber. With a single, decisive keystroke, Ephraim bypassed the local relays and sent the entire, uncorrupted truth directly to Earth High Command. The history of the universe changed in a heartbeat. Humanity was no longer a species of scavengers, begging for scraps on the edge of the galaxy. They had finally come home, reclaiming their rightful throne as the true, eternal protectors of the stars. Thank you so sincerely for listening to today's journey. We would love to know where in the world you are tuning in from, so please let us know in the comments. As we mentioned earlier, our channel is currently facing a complete loss of monetization from YouTube. If you found today's story thrilling and want to help our team feed our families and continue creating these universes for you, please consider supporting us with just $1. You can do so by scanning the PayPal QR code currently on your screen, or by using the PayPal link provided in the description and the pinned comment below. Your kindness means the galaxy to us. Thank you, and we will see you in the next adventure.